Today on Inside Utah Politics, criminal justice reform. It's being called the most significant change in a generation to federal prison sentencing laws. We're breaking down the First Step Act. Plus, 2018 coming to an end, from women making strides in the state legislature to a 42-year career coming to an end. We're looking back on the top political stories of the year.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Good Sunday morning, and thanks so much for joining us for Inside Utah Politics. I'm Glenn Mills. We begin this morning with the effort to address mass incarceration at the federal level. Brett Tolman is a former U.S. attorney and advocate of the First Step Act. Brett, great to have you on the show. Thanks so much for being here. Appreciate it. How did you get to this point? This has been a crusade for you for several years now.
It's interesting. I was a prosecutor and I wanted to be tough on crime, and I put my fair share of bad guys in jail, and many of them for decades. But while I worked in the justice system, I learned that there were malfunctions, there were issues, there were problems that need to be sorted out.
Paint the picture for us. You have a few instances here in the state of Utah where you just felt like you were putting someone away and it wasn't right what they were getting. So put the personal story here to us.
Yeah, I mean, I have one prosecution, for example, that sticks with me, a young man that was 22, 23 years old, virtually no criminal history, and in the federal system there's no parole. And he's serving basically a life sentence in federal prison. And it wakes you up. You start to look at the criminal justice system. I got into it to be tough on crime. I'm proud of the work I did, but I could see that we weren't winning the battle. Recidivism right now in the federal system is 50 to 60%. They get out, they commit crime. So we're failing 50 to 60% of the time. And that was an eye-opener for me. And so 8 years ago, I got involved and have become very passionate that we can be smart on crime, but still be tough.
So this particular incident that you're talking about, this individual, did you feel like he could be rehabilitated and potentially become a prosperous member of the community again?
There's no question. He's young. We know what it's like to make decisions in your early 20s or teens. Very young. Didn't hurt anybody in the crime that he committed. But in the federal system, there's no parole. And you're going to serve long sentences based on the amount of the drug you have, or based on the money, the amount of money you might steal. And those sentences have gone really, really long over the last few decades.
We know them as mandatory minimums.
Right.
Tell us what those are all about.
You know, Congress for a period of 10, 15 years was really trying to outdo each other, each side of the political aisle. So you had Democrats and Republicans. In the 90s, the Clinton crime bill actually elevated many, many mandatory minimums. The thought was, if I'm a politician, the thing that resonates is that I'll be tough on crime. But we passed mandatory minimums without any analysis of how successful they might be. So this is the first step in trying to address some of those problems that occurred.
And one of the big problems is bursting at the seams, our federal prisons.
Right.
Just mass incarceration. Talk about what that looks like across the country.
You know, we have over almost 2.5 million people incarcerated. We represent a very small portion of the world's population, but we incarcerate almost 25% of the world's incarcerated. So we do it at a massive level. In the federal system, we have hundreds of thousands of inmates that are incarcerated. And when I was U.S. Attorney, I knew that a major portion of the budget that I could utilize to investigate and prosecute crimes was going to the Bureau of Prisons, because we were ballooning our warehousing are incarcerated.
Let's move on to the First Step Act. It's being called the generational reform effort. Talk to us about what it would do specifically.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of people thought when I first went back to Congress, conservatives aren't going to get behind criminal justice reform. And I remember being told, you're not going to get anybody. But I had my friend Mike Lee there, and I knew he was passionate about it.
Yeah, a leading voice.
Leading voice.
Over the last couple of years.
That's right, and he's been a champion like no other. But the First Step Act basically studied some states. So you had Texas, Georgia, and others who had the same problem of ballooning, prisons and budgets and recidivism. So what did they do? It was very simple. They assessed the risk of recidivism, they reassessed their risk of recidivism, and then they allowed them to get out earlier those that were lowering their risk of recidivism. So the First Step Act, it's going to benefit those that are willing to do programs, education, and training and lower their risk of recidivism, and then it'll move them into a halfway house or home confinement sooner, which saves on money, reduces the recidivism rate, and there's other benefits for them as they try to reintegrate into society.
That's a big part of it, but also it gives a judge more discretion in sentencing. Talk about that.
So there's a few provisions that address the really harsh sentencing. It's going to expand the safety valve, which allows for better cooperation from someone that might be involved in the drug distribution chain. It incentivizes them to cooperate. It gives them the ability to lower their sentence slightly if they do that cooperation and if they are within that safety valve. It shortens and gets rid of a couple of malfunctions that created really long sentences that Congress never intended.
I would imagine, as a former U.S. attorney or as someone sitting on the bench, you would sit here and say there probably are some people that do need to be in prison and locked away for life. So you don't have a crystal ball. Right. You can't look into the future. How do you discern between which inmate may, deserve another chance and which one doesn't?
Yeah. I started the prosecution of Brian David Mitchell in the federal system, kidnapper of Elizabeth Smart. He's serving life sentence, and I'm proud of that work and grateful that he's going to be locked up for the rest of his life. But there are individuals that are serving, decades in the federal prison system that can rehabilitate and can get into the society and be productive. And it's not rocket science on who they are. You assess them at the beginning and you reassess while they're incarcerated based on the programming, faith-based groups they're organizing with, and education and job training. And if you see them participating and doing well in those, in some instances they lowered the risk of recidivism down to 6%.
That's fascinating when you think about that. This was an interesting bill because it passed in a landslide in both chambers. However, there was opposition even from those that said, I'm going to go ahead and give this my vote, saying perhaps it didn't go far enough and that, in fact, it is a first step. What else needs to happen down the road?
There's a lot that needs to happen. You have civil asset forfeiture that needs some reform. You have mandatory minimums that are out of line with the underlying crime. You have an over-criminalization issue. During Reagan years, or prior to Reagan, we had about 4,000 federal criminal statutes. Now we have over 33,000 federal criminal statutes. And so there's a lot that has to be done.
So do you see this fight still going on for several years down the road?
I do, because you can now see that Republicans and Democrats all are starting to realize it can't be ignored. It is a generational bill, and some saying the civil rights movement of our era is to fix the criminal justice system.
Talk about the response you're getting from those who are completely opposed to it. Very conservative senators such as Cotton and Kennedy,
right,
saying that this is soft on crime. And another quote was, it's misguided and dangerous. Your response to that?
So the misguided, the dangerous, this bill has been demagogued by those that want to maintain that impression that the only way for a politician to be is tough on crime. But Texas, Georgia, states that are tough on crime, they figured it out. Their crime rates have dropped. In Texas, they closed 8 prisons and saved $4 billion so far with these reforms. So conservatives that are properly educated and understand the issue are realizing that this is a win-win.
It's interesting how that's trickled down as well. Our local sheriff's race recently, that was a theme. We need to be smart on crime,
right,
not hard on crime. One last thought. You don't see this very often, such a bipartisan effort moving through. Your thoughts on Republicans and Democrats actually coming together to get this done?
It is so remarkable to me, because I've been around Congress now since 2003, which was really the last time that a major bipartisan bill went through Congress, and that was the Patriot Act after 9/11, and the country came together. So this is astounding because we really haven't seen a bill of this magnitude garner both sides.
Yeah. And we also know the president's going to sign it when it gets to his desk too, because he has jumped behind it. Thanks so much for your time helping us break down this bill. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Glenn.
You bet. Still to come, when the Utah legislature convenes next month, more women will be taking up seats than ever before in our state. Plus, a first-of-its-kind DUI law is about to go into effect in Utah. We are breaking down the big stories of the year coming up.